for as I said, I'm part of the core team and I'm the event chair for the symposium. And I'm thrilled that you're all here and really having a good time meeting you all tonight. And as you may know, one of the hallmarks of this event is that it's intimate and personal. And we want everyone here and everyone who will join us tomorrow to feel comfortable and safe, to express themselves, to be vulnerable, to listen, share, and discover opportunities to connect with others. To set the tone, therefore, for our day tomorrow, we're going to open with a program of personal stories. The 4 speakers you will hear from are going to share a story about an experience that informed their core values and motivates them in their work as advocates for equity in architecture. I'm going to read their names in the order that you'll hear from them. First will be Damaris Hollingsworth, then Beau, Frail, Hu, and Sandra Vivanco. And now I'll introduce Damaris.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm an architect, and I had an experience in the early years of my education that really shaped me as a designer and as an urban planner, and even later on as an advocate for equity, diversity, and inclusion. Growing up in the inner city of São Paulo, Brazil, every woman in my community, especially my church community, stayed home with the kids, and their dads went work outside. So my mom worked. She worked a lot, but she worked from home. She made clothes for money, while my dad worked long, long hours in the assembly line for General Motors. So in my young mind, that was the only family format. Moms stay home, dads go outside. Until one day, when I was 7, and my dad hired an architect. She was a young woman, really, really fresh out of school. And I remember watching her meeting with my parents in our kitchen table and thinking like, she seemed so powerful, so intelligent. And I decided then that I was going to be what she was. So when she left, I asked my parents, who was she? And they said she was an architect. So I didn't know what it was. I had no idea, but that wasn't the point. I wanted to grow up to be as powerful and intelligent as it seemed to be to me. So I told my parents about my aspirations, and my dad's immediate response was, well, to be an architect, you would have to go to college, and college really is not for people like us. So if you know me even a little bit, you know that what he said, like one end of one ear and out the other, because he was trying to tell me I couldn't have something I wanted. And 15 years later, I was admitted into the School of Architecture and Urban Planning at University of São Paulo, or as we call it, FAU. So my siblings and I have 2 siblings, a sister and a brother, and we were the first 3 kids in both sides of the family to make it to college. So my dad made it to elementary school, to middle school actually. My mom made it to elementary school. So it was a huge deal for my family that I made it to the school, especially because FAU still is one of the best schools of architecture and urban planning in Latin America, and even back then was top 100 in the country. So it was a big deal, and I felt like that was the hardest part, getting to the school. It was not until I was in school that I realized that that world I had fought so hard to enter was definitely not a place where I felt like I belonged. Because I was older than everybody else, because it took me 3 trials to be accepted. I had to work full time, while most of the students, if not everybody else, only went to school full time. And a lot of the textbooks were actually in Italian, French, Spanish, or English, not in Portuguese. And I wanted to go Portuguese. So there was those constant reminders that my education did not prepare me for university, or even just to have a conversation with my peers or my professors. So that feeling of not belonging there really nagged me almost every day. So my natural reaction, what I really wanted to do was to hide. And I put up a facade, of course, but I don't care. But I really wanted to hide so I didn't have to interact. and feel so stupid all the time. But I encountered a small problem. The building that still houses the FAU was designed by Vivanco, a modernist architect. And this building has very, very few full walls. It barely has any doors. So anyone really from campus can walk in and go through the ramps and go to the building pretty much barrier-free. Because it was intentionally designed to do that, to invite people in, to promote fluidity, interactions, and exchange of ideas. So in the absence of walls and doors, I would find myself many times sitting in the library patio, and I couldn't help but overhear the conversations of the people around me. And a lot of times they were talking about the same textbook I was trying to read with the dictionary, trying to understand Italian or Spanish. And many times I actually resented them because I realized that they actually had been to the places I was reading about, so they're talking about it. So again, I wanted to stay away and to keep distance. But also that forced interactions made me realize that I actually started enjoying the forced conversations or the forced stories I had to hear. And I started smiling sometimes at conversations, and didn't take long for me to realize that they were very much people like me. They had privileges that I didn't have, but they were human beings. And they were, most of all, they were kids trying to learn, trying to make the most of what they had, and trying to have fun while doing that. So soon enough, I started mingling and interacting and making friends, some of the best friends I still have to this day. And what I learned in that process was that, and really impacted me as a designer this day, is that a building designed with intentionality will, in fact, do what it's supposed to do. Even when humans, and hence myself, try to hide or put up a wall, if a building was designed to promote togetherness, it will promote togetherness. And I experienced that. And that really changed me, and to this day, I feel the impact of that. That experience in that building taught me that if I, in that case I was forced to, but I learned that if I let myself see past the differences related to race or ethnicity or socioeconomics or even intellectuality, I will actually be allowing myself to see the human being and to see the commonality. So that really brought me this focus on when designing a building, when designing a campus, or designing an urban setting, to find ways to promote integration, to promote interaction and engagement, to find ways to create community. And having really lived many of my years feeling like an outsider and feeling like not really welcome in places I was in or I'm still in sometimes. So that I feel like it's my duty as a human being, as a mom, as an architect, as an urban planner, to always focus on that. Find ways to create, to be that voice that promotes and creates the engagement, the creation of community, the interactions. Well, my CEO describes community in a very unique way. He defines it as when people intentionally behave like they belong together. So it's always my aspiration as a urban planner, as a designer, to create spaces and places that trigger people to behave like they belong together, like community. Thank you.
I'm AL, I'm not you. We were announced in a different order, but okay. When I arrived at Columbia University to study for my MArch, I really doubled down on becoming an architect. I wore all black, I got the boots that make that really nice clack when you walk on wood, you know? And I got the thick rimmed glasses. I thought that if I looked the part, then I would become the part. But by the middle of my second semester, I learned a lot about playing the part of an architect, specifically a woman architect. I learned to speak with confidence, but not too much confidence, so I don't come off as bossy or pushy. I learned to tweak my design process and the way that I communicated my ideas to please my professors more than I pleased myself. And I learned to take critiques with a smile and like a really healthy dose of salt, because the critics were almost always really macho and aggressive. At the same time, I was realizing that I was non-binary, which means that I don't identify as a man or a woman. And this shift in identity was actually incredibly freeing, because I finally let myself define myself outside the boundaries of man or woman. But in the studio, I felt unseen, unheard, and unrecognizable. It was like they couldn't see me for who I was, and it was like I wasn't non-binary or genderqueer enough. In order to fight this feeling of invisibility, I knew that I had to speak up and come out. Because I thought if graduate school is a safe space for testing out new ideas, then why limit myself to an already set path? And if graduate school is a place of learning, why wouldn't I protest about my professors and the way that they were kind of hindering their students' progress? So I became vocal about my identity as a non-binary queer person and about the sexism and toxic masculinity that I experienced in the studio. In a way, I was shining a light on different but overlapping things by making clear who I was, how I wanted to be seen, and how I wanted to be treated in the studio. Coming out kind of forced me to own my experiences so that I'd be more aware of my identity, despite operating within a cisgendered world, and more aware of the toxic behaviors in the studio and how that impacted me and my classmates. Becoming prouder as a non-binary person and louder as an architecture student was a way for me to protest against the assumptions that critics and professors often made about me. So while all that great stuff was happening, final review rolls around, because time doesn't stop. And I remember feeling extremely nihilistic and bitter, because it seemed like the critics were really dismissive and seemed to belittle my female classmates' projects and their work. And of course I was wearing a black silk shirt, black pants, black boots, and the thicker glasses. It was almost like armor. But actually I had to wear the glasses because I got pink eye from crying about the studio with my contacts in. So minutes before my presentation, I make a commitment to myself to give it my all. The project was a bank that was more like a resource center for people who didn't have bank accounts, which included spaces for financial mentoring and for investment, for the people who needed it the most. There was a central atrium, and that connected a cafe space with the library, with lounge space, and classrooms, so that it was accessible for people like women who had started their own businesses and for potential investors. And I was really proud of my project and how hard I'd worked on it. But by the end of the review, I had been called angry for giving a passionate presentation and harsh for answering questions. If you ask me a question, I'm going to answer it. I mean, much of the criticism seemed to focus on the impossibility, like the utter, like unbelievability that this project could even happen. Like in their limited view of architecture, the critics couldn't see how this project could be successful. And in the moment, I felt like I had failed as an architecture student because I had designed an illegible building and that I had done something wrong, and I needed to conform to the right way to do architecture. So to move away from socially responsible design toward formalism. But in retrospect, what the critics said or couldn't say about my project didn't really matter. I could wear all the right clothing, draw all the rendered plans and section perspectives and taxonomic diagrams to describe my project. I could talk about my project like I really believed in it, and still the critics would have something destructive to say. And I think that's because the status quo of architecture is exactly how I experienced it. Sexism serves to limit opportunities. Serves to limit opportunities. What else? There's so much more about the status quo that I can't remember right now. Oh, right. Ego-inflating aggression by people in power, so like professors, tend to damage the self-esteem and confidence of their students, or people who are on the receiving end. And there is a third thing. Oh, right, and I know this because I just graduated from school. Design pedagogies that focus on formalism and theory tend to entrench the belief that architecture and architects are apolitical and cannot affect social change.
Yeah.
So kind of the conclusion of that, I know that sounds like a conclusion. So the status quo model of the architect shames anyone who dares to be different, just like the binary framework of gender shames anyone who does not conform to male or female norms. And I find that the power of being a non-binary architect is in the rejection of the norms of gender and architecture as we know it, to delimit, to escape conformity. And I think that if we want to change our professional culture, then we need to think outside of the lines that box us in and start to build new spaces that expand and redefine who we are and the work that we do.
Hey y'all, I'm Beau from Texas. I practice standing up, but I kind of like how everyone's sitting down. So I was driving to work one Monday morning last year, and I was doing a gratitude exercise to shift into a positive mindset. Typical Monday, right? And I remember being grateful for being a part of this talented group of driven architects at a well-respected office. Less than 1 hour later, though, I was let go of this job of 2 years with no explanation other than you weren't a good fit. And I felt this surprising emotion that day, relief. I expected to feel anger and devalued, which I did, but the thought of not having to come into this particular office environment anymore gave me a calming sense of relief. So I had started here about 2 years prior. I transitioned from another firm, another boutique office in Austin, and where I really wasn't getting the growth and leadership opportunities that I wanted. So I was super excited to start here, where I was going to get the opportunity to lead my own projects and to manage them. And they were also encouraging of my volunteering at AI Austin, which in community design specifically, which is a passion of mine. So first day in the office, get the cool office manual, reading through it, have to sign it. In there it says I have to work a minimum 45-hour work week, which wasn't explained during the interview process. So my time felt devalued from the start, and I would have definitely negotiated a higher salary if I had known. And I soon realized that this office demanded working unhealthy, excessive hours during the week, and also really didn't promote or encourage their employees to have passions outside of work. So about 2 months in, there's this architecture leadership event that I'd really like to go to, and I asked the partners if I can attend it. Take a half day one Friday, which I would have already met my work hours that week because I was working a lot. And I got an email at 2 a.m. from one of the partners telling me that I would be letting the team down if I chose to go to this leadership event. So I was really discouraged by this, of course, especially since we didn't have any imminent deadlines, and I was also the junior staff on a team of 4 working on schematic design. It seemed unreasonable to me. And it just further showed that office's lack of involvement in outside organizations wasn't by our individual disinterest, it was from deliberate design by the higher-ups creating that atmosphere. So, of course, starting at a new office, you're learning new office protocols and all that new jazz. And one that I was actually dismayed by at the office was an unwritten and untold rule that you had to email everybody if you were leaving during the day. That could be for a site visit or for a personal appointment, anything. So we had a receptionist starting, and I was like, hey, great opportunity. Maybe we can switch to a sign in and out sheet. Our inboxes are long enough. And of course, that wasn't accepted, and we continued to have our inboxes intruded on whenever somebody wasn't feeling well, needed to see a doctor, or wanted to go take their dog for a walk in the middle of the day. So eventually, before I started at this office, one of the partners actually told me only 3 people had chosen to leave in the last 10 years. I was like, that's amazing. That's going to change once I started. It wasn't because of the first year or so that I was there, 8 of the original 22 people left. And I remember one of the people at their going away happy hour, they had recently been promoted, they worked some of the longest hours in the office, and we had a little one-on-one, and they told me, I really hope I make better decisions for myself in the future. So I'm still here. It just goes to show you that when you have an environment that is really leading to burnout or excessive employee demands, you're creating an environment that stresses, that doesn't really put the health of the individual at the heart of the company's goals and procedures. So it really impacted my values personally because I made an intentional effort to make sure I had healthy boundaries between the time I was giving to the office and to my personal needs. And it also informs my values going forward in that I choose to be involved in environments that promote individual self-care. Because really all offices should be putting that as a metric of success in their company culture. So all that to say that burnout and high employee turnover are not qualifiers of good design. Good design does not come from overworked and stressed out people. And even though we're creatives, we don't always conform to a 40-hour work week. We do need time to recharge. And we need time, especially away from the office, to bring in those outside experiences in order to sustain our creative energy. I authentically believe that. And so, quick, I'm going to reference my hand where I wrote down what I'm supposed to do. Besides just advocating for my own health and well-being and leadership development, I began advocating for the rights of others as well. We were updating our employee manual. So I suggested that we include a paternity leave policy. I also suggested we include lesbian, gay, and transgender people in our non-discrimination clause. These statements of inclusivity matter, and living up to them matters even more. I'm going to do a quote drop. Michelle Obama said, "The leaders don't wait for somebody to make you do it or for the law to change. Do it because it's the right thing to do."
Yeah.
Thank you, Michelle. And so, at this office, I obviously felt pressure to limit my volunteering, and it was hard because it was a part of my passion in community design and outreach, which doesn't happen at a traditional firm structure. Things were looking up for a little bit. They gave me some extra personal time to use for a new board position, and they were originally approved or they did approve me participating in the Association for Community Design Fellowship, which I got last year. I would have had to take 2 weeks of unpaid leave, but it was a good fit, I thought. And that all changed when I was fired before the fellowship, unfortunately. For the better, though. I'm in a good place. It's not a sad ending to this story. But, and I learned last year that my old office, which were like family to me, 6 of the 30 people who were working there were let go last year. And usually quickly replaced. This is one of the best firms in Austin that has a lot of work right now. And so when I look at a statistic like that, and when your office strategy is to either stress people out and burn them out to the point that they leave, or you're threatening them with the ability to be let go, you're really not putting the well-being of your employees at the heart of your business. And so employees, obviously, in my opinion, and I hope we would all agree, should be our greatest assets in our companies, right? When our employees are happy and healthy, their productivity and their loyalty to our offices goes up. That sounds like a good business strategy and great for the bottom line too. So after my fellowship, I decided to start my own practice, Activate Architecture. And I did that for a couple of reasons. Thank you. One was to work on more community-based projects. And another was really to create a culture for myself that was more equitable. And also, hopefully, eventually for others to join in that equitable culture as well. Workplaces can put our employees at the heart of our goals and procedures. And we have a voice to use when things that aren't included can be included. So when we see policies that aren't inclusive, we should call them out and ask for them, demand for them to be included. When we see office practices that are actually creating undue stress, unnecessary stress, we need to advocate to change them. And when we see a coworker that's struggling in an unfair work environment, we should stand up for and with them. We're designers. We know that intentions impact space and behaviors. So we should use our voices and the power of design to uplift values that make workplaces equitable, healthy, and just for everyone. Thank you.
My name is Sandra, and I was 19 when I first landed at the Los Angeles International Airport. And I had no prior memory of ever having been to the US before, even though by some historical accident I was actually born in New Orleans, but I left at 3 years old with my Colombian mother to join my Peruvian father in Lima and start a new life together. After that, my knowledge of the US was based on the typical TV reruns that most foreigners grow up on. The Flintstones and Mr. Ed spoke in Mexican accented Spanish, and I thought that was perfectly natural. And my mother made sure to tell stories about JFK and MLK, which made this place seem even more promising. Back to that day in LAX, I was tired, alone, emotionally exhausted. And the most complex airports that I had ever been to, dreading having to go through immigration because I would have to demonstrate that I was in fact a U.S. citizen. When I got there, a burly male officer scanned me through his blue eyes and said, "You sure don't sound like you're from New Orleans. Why is that?" That was my first taste of the imposter complex. Since then, I have gotten used to the inquisitive scan, the puzzled look, the uncomfortable pause. Even today, after many years of proving myself time and time again, I still get that look, followed by the awkward silence, maybe even longer because I have managed to lose my accent, almost. I am perfectly aware that I do not look stereotypically Latina, nor do I sound 100% American, so it takes most people some time to know or to realize that I am not who they expect me to be. Besides ethnicity and gender, there's also a class issue. You see, I grew up in a middle-class family. That is until my father left home and things got financially more challenging for us. It turns out that my mother, a bright and foreign divorcee with no family connections of her own, was simply unemployable in the Lima of the 70s. Such is the legacy of patriarchy. Since my mother couldn't afford a private college education, my only choice was UNI, the premier architectural and engineering university in the country. That was and still is free, but only after winning that one coveted spot with over 30 other hungry, determined students from all ethnic and social backgrounds in a highly segregated Peruvian society. Once admitted, I quickly realized that there was this energy on campus that really was burning some resentment, the political resentment that actually fed the Shining Path, the guerrilla group that dominated Peruvian reality in the 80s. Needless to say, this was not a choice that most middle-class women took, as it was not encouraged, but for me, it was this or nothing. Sometimes walking on campus felt like I was walking through a landmine because there was actually no way to realize who I was actually engaging with. I learned to minimize my presence. I was told to never leave or arrive alone, and I complied. Little did I know that on the plane that transported me here, I would go from being highly visible to almost invisible. My mother and I slowly carved a living in the tumultuous San Francisco of the 80s. She got an admin job, and I worked as a teller while I saved money to go to architecture school. We lived in one room in the Tenderloin at the Mary Elizabeth Inn, which has been providing affordable housing for women since 1914. Many years later, I was one of 3 architects shortlisted for its renovation. But that's another story. The path has not been easy. From bank teller, I went to restaurant hostess to front desk clerk at a fancy hotel, working the graveyard shift, which allowed me to attend City College during the day and do my homework at night while the guests slept. Eventually, I transferred to UC Berkeley. And 2 weeks after graduation, I managed to secure architecture employment. At that job interview, a senior principal, old enough to be my father, flirted with me and said that my bouncy energy would be nice to have around the office. Jack made me feel like I was a cheerleader when I aspired to be the quarterback, but I got the job. In the early days, I was met with either hostility or contempt, as apparently my Latina exuberance was a little bit too much for the sterile, monochrome, highly controlled modern monastery that was the design studio. So I learned to tone it down. 2 slightly senior colleagues, both males, didn't hide their suspicion and bias towards me. Gabriel, who shared a workstation with, blurted out that he found my phone conversations disruptive and that I was far too bubbly and popular in the office for my own good. Jerry bled all over my drawings with his red lines, full with all cap notes and one too many exclamation points. I was seldom included in their after-work social events, and as a response or a reaction to the dismissive body language, unmistakable around my wardrobe choices, I started favoring less colorful outfits. And instead, with my starting salary, bought discounted minimalist designer clothing that I couldn't afford just to fit in. An immigrant assimilates by necessity, and in the process often feels alienated from one's original tribe. The new terrain and its unspoken rules, it's unfamiliar, and the only way to counter the frequent microaggressions is with either stubbornness or denial. In response, I have honed a perspective from the other side and often see things differently through the immigrant filter. Always skeptical and critical of empty formalism, I am passionate about the ways in which gender and culture shape the built environment. Not interested in designing for the elite, I seek opportunities to work with the disenfranchised. Both as a student and as a professor, I am drawn to iconic immigrant architects, women like Lina Bobardi in Brazil and Clara Porcel in Mexico, who wielded the immigrant filter to interpret their adopted culture and turn it into magnificent, original design production. Finally, encouraged by the younger generation ability to accept difference a little bit more easily, I seek to inspire my students to be equal parts passionate and compassionate, adept and adaptable, resilient and respectful, in the hopes that in the future they won't need to scan a stranger to match their expectation of what this person wants. We all belong where we are here and now.